You're listening to Now I've Heard Everything, interviews from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s with voices from the past.
It is really little short of a scandal that our education system teaches people the book of Genesis and don't teach people the truth. They teach people a medieval myth.
Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins. Today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Were Adam and Eve real? Or is the story of creation told in Genesis just a myth? British professor of evolutionary biology Richard Dawkins is a well-known, very prominent figure in both science and atheism. He's known for his eloquent writings on evolution and his critique of religious beliefs. In early 1988, I had the chance to interview Dawkins about his best-selling book, The Blind Watchmaker, and his critique of traditional religious beliefs. Now, I have to tell you, as you're about to listen to this, there's a reason that it sounds a little different. For whatever reason, that day in the studio, my microphone wasn't working properly. I didn't find this out until after the interview was over. I should have checked my equipment afterwards. That's why, even though his portion of the interview sounds fine, mine sounds a bit echoey and off mic. I hope that doesn't distract you too much. So here now from 1988, Richard Dawkins.
The blind watchmaker is as opposed to the divine watchmaker, which was Archdeacon Paley's view of God. At the beginning of the 19th century, he wrote a book called Natural Theology, which is the most famous expression of the argument from design, which I suppose is the most famous argument for the existence of a God. He said, suppose you find a watch, and you just open it up, and you look inside, and you see all the cogs and springs, and everything fits together beautifully. And you say, this has got to have a watchmaker, because it's so well designed, everything fits so well, and it obviously is doing something useful, namely telling the time. And then how much more do you feel that when you look at an eye or an ear, or a foot or a hand? Clearly this is a machine, clearly it's been designed by a master engineer, a divine watchmaker. The amazing thing is that not many decades later, Charles Darwin came along and showed that there didn't have to be a watchmaker, that the forces of physics, the blind forces of physics, could do the job if they were deployed in a rather special way. So the blind watchmaker is natural selection.
Could you not argue, though, that what we evolved from was in itself a watch?
The origin of life, the origin of evolution, was something very simple. What we have now is something very complicated. It's relatively easy to understand how simplicity could come into the world by the unaided laws of physics. It's very hard to see how complexity could. The beauty of the Darwinian explanation is that it starts from simplicity, which is easy to understand, and works up to complexity, which is difficult to understand. Anybody can believe that simple things like clouds and grains of sand could just happen. It's very hard to believe that watches and eyes and hands could just come into being. And Darwinism is what shows us how you can get from one to the other.
Where did Adam and Eve come from, if not from the biblical way, the biblical story of God creating a man and then creating the woman from the man's rib?
Yeah, there never had to be an Adam and Eve in the sense that there never had to be a first human. Of course, our ancestors before humans were apes, and before that they were monkeys and so on. So that there never was a particular point in evolutionary history where you could say this is the first human. As a matter of fact, there is some evidence that if you trace back the ancestry of all modern humans, we did pass through a bottleneck of a single female about 250,000 years ago. So if you want to call her Eve, you can, but it's nothing to do with the biblical Eve.
I notice the anthropologists now are calling her Eve, but they're uncomfortable calling her.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's a little sort of journalistic gimmick to call her Eve, but Eve as such, of course, never existed.
But people who believe that the Bible is the word, and it is the only word that they are to accept, cannot accept Darwinism.
They're just wrong. I mean, they're uneducated, and I don't blame them for that. I blame the school system for that. It is really little short of a scandal that our education system, both in this country and in my country, teach people the book of Genesis and don't teach people the truth. They teach people a medieval myth, well, a pre-medieval myth, it's medieval form, and they don't teach them the truth, which is an exceedingly exciting truth about why we are here, what we're for, what our history is. The whole of our existence and the reason for it is now fully understood, and more than 50% of the people of America and Britain don't know about it, and that's really a shame.
Well, a lot of people, be they Christians or not, or creationists or not, take a deep offense at the intimation that they are somehow related to those that they see behind bars at the zoo.
Well, that's their problem, not mine. Whether they like it or not, they are related, and this is a completely undoubted fact. The genetic sharing, the number of genes that we share in common with chimpanzees, is over 99%. We are very, very close cousins indeed of chimpanzees. We diverged from them a matter of 5 or 6 million years ago, which is quite a short time. We are very close cousins of chimpanzees.
If I'm understanding you correctly, we are destined over a period of the next few thousand or million years to become more and more complex?
Well, it's not as simple as that. For one thing, evolution probably goes in fits and starts, and so if we were to come back in a few thousand years, we wouldn't expect to see any change. We'd have to come back in a few million years, as you say. Now, it could be that if we come back in, say, 10 million years, we'll be more complicated, perhaps with bigger brains. It's rather more likely that we'll be extinct. Most species that have ever lived, 99% of the species that have ever lived, are now extinct, and our species shows something like a talent for going extinct, one might say. So I wouldn't expect to see any of our descendants alive in 10 million years' time. If they are, then maybe they will have bigger brains, yes.
Would we have wings? Would we have fins? Would we have bizarre...
Well, that is possible because, of course, birds and bats and pterodactyls did evolve from wingless ancestors. I rather doubt whether we shall, because we're very effective flyers with engineering, with machines like airplanes, and so we don't actually need to evolve wings, and I wouldn't expect us to.
Do you find that a lot of people once they learn that you are a teacher of Darwinism, do you find that a lot of people pick fights with you?
No, I don't think so. They're pretty amicable fights anyway. These are intellectual arguments. People who are really religious bigots, I suppose, possibly do, and there are quite a few of those. Unfortunately, they are also fairly influential, especially in this country. But no, there's usually not much overt hostility.
Well, you can understand that. This being originally a religious-based country, a country founded upon religious precepts, and for a country that is so heavily grounded and based in the Judeo-Christian way where you look at that, it's very hard to accept Darwinism, isn't it?
Well, that's true. It's paradoxical, nevertheless. I mean, that, as you say, God created Adam and Eve. That just is the Jewish creation myth. And there are lots of creation myths all over the world. Every tribe has its own creation myth, and there's no particular reason to prefer one rather than another. It's pure historical accident that we happen to have the Jewish creation myth of Adam and Eve. There's nothing special about it. It's false, like all other creation myths. The truth has been known for 100 years, and as I said before, it just is a great shame that our education system chooses to teach people a medieval story rather than the true story.
Is Darwinism becoming more popular?
If I have anything to do with it, with the blind watchmaker, it will. I don't want to sound messianic about it. I'm not preaching about it. I just am fascinated by the truth of our existence and therefore want people to understand these exciting things. And so I would like it to become more popular because it's fun.
It is. Do you find it difficult to defend? Sometimes, again, whenever it seems that whenever it is brought up in a news story that I'm writing or in whatever context, it's a very inflammatory issue.
It's very easy to defend. The facts speak for themselves. It's sometimes a little bit unfortunate the way creationists have entrenched positions and the way they're allowed to develop them. I mean, if I could just tell a little story. Yesterday in Boston, I was on a radio talk show, and there were, I'm sure, a lot of people out there who would have liked to have asked me questions, and I could have answered those questions, and it would have been an interesting, informative session. I mean, I know my subject, and I could have told them something. Instead, what happened was that a a man phoned in who said he was a professor of biology and a creationist. And because he had the title professor, the radio station, understandably enough, thought, well, they'd better give him kind of equal time. It's, after all, one professor against another. And the result was that nobody else was able to get in with their interesting questions. The thing was portrayed as an honest-to-goodness debate between two academics, when, of course, it was nothing of the kind. I mean, he was not a bona fide scientist at all. He was a fake and a charlatan. And it was just, I think, unfortunate that because he was able to trot out the title professor, the whole slant of the radio show got twisted. That, I just think, is unfortunate, and it wouldn't happen if frankly, if the education system were better.
Do you think creationists don't play fair?
Oh, I'm sure they play fair in the sense that they've got a point of view and they're going to do everything in their power to develop it. But there have been some very unfortunate things. There have been disgraceful stories of textbook publishers of biology textbooks, cowardly textbook publishers, being intimidated by politically influential creationists into censoring evolution from textbooks.
But those people are the same people who say, well, these textbooks have left out creation.
Well, of course, and you have to just simply examine the facts and see where the balance of plausibility lies.
Is it possible for a school system in any country to present both views equally and give, quote, equal time to creationism, Darwinism, and say, here's what each side thinks?
Well, let me say two things about that. One is that, to be fair, you would also have to give equal time to the Flat Earth Society. I mean, there are people who think that the Earth is flat and that and don't believe that it goes around the sun and so on. Where are you going to draw the line about giving equal time? Do you give equal time to people who believe that the Earth was created from the excrement of ants? Do you give equal time to people who believe that the Earth stands on the back of a tortoise? There are lots and lots of creation myths, as I say. Why give equal time to the Jewish creation myth on the one hand and evolution on the other? Modern science has been going for 300 years. It has developed a worldview, a picture of the universe, which is now accepted by all educated people all over the world. There doesn't seem to be any obvious reason for giving equal time to any particular pre-scientific view rather than any other.
You raise another question here that I want to ask back to you again. Why didn't Plato, why didn't Aristotle, why didn't any of the great thinkers come up with a theory even resembling this before Charles Darwin?
It's very strange. It really is, because it's such a simple theory. It's such an elegant theory. It's so easy to understand. You'd think that any child should have thought of it, and yet it had to wait for the middle of the 19th century. Darwin didn't think of it himself until the 1830s, and then nobody else thought of it until Wallace in the 1850s. It is a bizarre thing when you think of how much, more sophisticated, say, Newtonian mechanics is than Darwinian evolution. I don't understand it. I think possibly it has to do with the fact that it is extremely alien in various ways from our preconceptions. For one thing, you have to get your mind round the idea of deep time. Time, as we understand it, means minutes and hours and days and years and decades. Centuries, perhaps even millennia. It does not mean millions of years, and it does not mean tens of millions of years. You've got to get your mind around tens of millions of years before you can understand evolution. It's also a very hostile idea to people who want cozy, comforting view of the universe. The universe is a very cold place, and it's getting colder. It's a very lonely place. We are on a single planet that has life. Maybe there are others, but we don't know that. It is a frightening thought to think that we are possibly the only sentient creatures in the universe. It's a frightening thought to think that there's no God. It's a frightening thought to think that we're going to die and rot and not survive death. All those things are alienating, and I suppose tend to make people resist understanding the truth. Scientific truth, because it's true, is exciting, and because it's exciting, it's fun. One shouldn't think of it as being a threatening thing. It is genuinely interesting to know why you exist and what you're for. If you imagine you've just kind of woken up in a strange place and you look around you and you say, where am I? That's the position we're in on this planet. And in the past few decades, we are finally in a position to give an answer to that question. It's very exciting. And one shouldn't be afraid of it.
Richard Dawkins is 82 now. Now, you can get a copy of The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins by tapping on the link in our show notes or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. While you're at heardeverything.com, be sure and listen to my 2002 interview with the man who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the double helix, James Watson.
I didn't want to just be known for the double helix. So before I made the discovery, no one thought I was going anywhere, and afterwards I certainly went nowhere.
And my 1990 conversation with someone who knows a bit about chimpanzees, Jane Goodall.
When I was a child, I had two dreams. One was to study animals, work with them, learn about them, preferably in Africa. And the other was to write books about them. So how fortunate I've been that those dreams have come true.
And as you know, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, from semisonic drummer to author, my 2004 interview with Jacob Slichter.
It must be 0.001% of bands actually make money off of their record sales. Over the course of our career, we sold close to 2 million records, and we never saw one dime from the sale of records.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.